With that, I'd like to invite Rick Long, sorry about that. I'd like to invite that guy right over there. Rick Long, PEI's Executive Vice President and General Counsel, up to the stage to give his thoughts about where the industry is and where it might be going. Rick, it's all yours.
So, Charlie kept talking about how he couldn't be fired. Apparently, I have been fired. Rick Young now is the Executive Vice President of PEI, but it's great to be here. Thanks to all of you for coming to Atlanta. We have been, and people are still registering today, but our attendance this year exceeds the last time we were here in Atlanta, and that's always exciting. You want to be moving in that direction. But even more than that, the engagement this year is so exciting. And for those of you who were at the educational sessions yesterday, we had 2 sessions yesterday with 500 people in them. We have never had that before. And that is exciting to us. It says a lot about the PEI staff, the program we put together. It says a lot about those of you who volunteered to speak and to be on panels, so we thank you so much for that. I look forward to this time every year. It's so fun to get up in front of you, to see your smiling faces, to be able to say thank you, and to share some facts about where the industry is. I will tell you that my first thought for this year was just to say, we're doing great. And thanks very much. And that would be the end of my presentation. The problem with that, there's 2 problems with that. One is I have 20 minutes according to my little clock, and I would have been done in a minute, so that wouldn't have been very good. The other is that my impressions that I have about how business is going are based largely on anecdotal evidence. For you, it's an everyday thing. You know what's going on out there. And I do from talking to you, but anecdotal evidence can be limited in its accuracy. It sometimes can be misleading. And so that's why we go to the trouble to do these surveys and collect some data. Thank you to those of you who participate in these. It's really important that we get your feedback. So thank you for doing that. And it'll happen again next year. So be looking next September or so when we send out next year's survey, and we would love to have your participation. I always think it's important to start not just with numbers, but to start with context. And so what I wanted to do for this year, this is the slide that I had last year for the context in which we are operating on a broad macroeconomic level. This is the actual slide, the same little $ graphic and everything. What I said last year for the economy, taxes are down, interest rates are low-ish, business regulations are down, GDP is up, manufacturer confidence is high, unemployment is historically low. All of those things are still essentially true this year. And yet there's some other macro factors to think about as well. What's happening right now? Wild stock market swings. Most of you are not publicly traded companies. We have only a few publicly traded members, but many of you have 401ks that have stock investments in them. Stock market loss to the Dow went down, 800 points in the last 2 days. Today it could go up a couple hundred points. It's just a crazy time. The growth in GDP is decelerating. It's growing, but it's decelerating right now, as is jobs growth, if you look at the jobs figures for the last few months. Tariffs are a confusing thing. Trade wars are a real possibility. That last bullet point, DC turmoil, I really struggled with what the noun was that I was going to use there. I had frustration, I had craziness, pick your noun in a bad way and it would apply there. But we have to wonder about that. Same thing on the industry itself. This is the slide from last year when I said, here's the context of our industry. Federal UST regulatory deadlines are here. And by the way, our friends at EPA are here also. So hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us. State UST regulations are here in many states, just over the horizon. The EMV deadline is getting closer. Some testing, obviously, is a big issue. And there are new opportunities that are on the horizon. But there are also other things that are happening this year, and maybe in a bigger way. There's more and more talk about petroleum as the enemy. I literally have had people say that to me, and maybe you have as well. It's sort of an unsettling thing to hear, because I don't think of it that way, and I'm sure you don't. The rise of electric vehicles. Charlie talked about change. We're going to talk about EVs again in just a few minutes. That's a change. That is a new truth, a new reality. Consolidation has been a reality in our industry for a long time, but boy, it's accelerating, isn't it? Both on the manufacturer side and the distributor side. That's a reality for all of us. And one thing that I heard a lot about in the survey is just the generational shifts that are going on, not only among our members, but among our members' customers. And that means you sort of have to retrain the people that you work with, not only in your own company, but those you do business with, and that can be challenging. So let's begin to look at some of the data. Here's what the survey that many of you participated in showed on the distributors and contractor side. First of all, where is your revenue coming from right now? This is not an area that saw a lot of change this year. It did last year. If you went back and look at the presentation from last year, that retail fueling number went down in 2018. I apologize, I don't remember the precise number, but I think in the year before it was 56 or 57%, went down to 52%, and we stayed there this year. Not surprising with all of the EMV work and the testing and compliance work that's going on. A little bit more work on the commercial side, and you'll hear about that as well. But the balance of revenue in the main is essentially the same as it was last year. How's business? So I have had anecdotally, many of you tell me over the year, if I meet you, almost always I will say, how's business? You know that. In fact, I would encourage you, any of you who see me casually, just tell me before I ask, because I am always going to ask how is business. And I've heard many of you say, best year ever, never been as busy as this, those sorts of things. The number here is actually down just a little bit, but I don't think in a substantial way. I don't really think that's statistically meaningful. We have had quite a run for these 5 years I show here. Think back to 2008 and 2009. We were not on a scale of 1 to 10 at 7 point something. So it's exciting to see that continuing. We ask what's going well. I referred to commercial work a moment ago. Commercial work is the thing that got the most points, if you will, this year, the rise in that kind of work. But look at those last 3 items. All of those are retail fueling activities. And so UST system upgrades, testing, inspection, and compliance, and EMV, all of those scored very, very high. So in fact, retail continues to dominate and be strong. This slide is based on your narrative comments that I got from people, just the sense that I picked up from the things that you said. There was a lot of talk about emergency generators and fueling systems, and we're going to hear more about that. That's going to continue to be, I think, a growing area of opportunity for our members, so we certainly saw that. Lube lift and car wash continues to be something that some distributors are getting excited about. And just as we're seeing equipment upgrades on the retail side, many of you talked about we're having a lot of equipment upgrades on the commercial side. It turns out that coincidentally with the retail work, our commercial systems are also at a stage where it's time to upgrade. Biggest challenges for distributors and contractors, shocker, shortage of skilled labor. I know all of you are surprised to see that, but that is the number one issue, no question about it. I will tell you, by the way, that I had a little interaction with NACS before this presentation and shared some of this data with them, and some of this is being reported in a session that they are doing as well, because they wanted to know how we were seeing the industry, and we were pleased to share some of this. Many of our distributors and contractors continue to be concerned about manufacturer relationships. There's not a lot specific to say there because those are one-to-one type relationships in many cases, but just the frustrations of that sometimes can be troubling. The procrastination about getting busy on the EMV upgrades. We'll see another slide in a moment about EMV, but that has been a challenge. Profit is always a challenge, and so that made the list as a high level. This also is based on some narratives. I don't think I would have done this slide but for the last bullet point that I wanted to say, but I'll get to that in just a second. But several of you just talked about personnel transitions again within your company. And in some markets, this was more some regional things. Some of you talked about the fluctuations in business, and the 2 quotes that I love the most, these are actual quotes. One is, it's like riding a roller coaster. And the second one, these are anonymous surveys, so if you're the person who said this, I want to know it because I love this. Chicken one day, feathers the next. I just like that comment. So let me know if that was you who said that. What about on the manufacturer side? trended very close to what we saw with distributors and contractors. How's business on a 1 to 10 scale? This year, our manufacturers rated it at a 7.27. You'll notice that the manufacturers a few years ago were a little bit lower. That is, I think, a statistically significant difference. Last year, a huge bump up, and we're still doing really well right now, so I think that's a very good sign. What's going well? Manufacturers are excited about new store construction, and not surprisingly, because when our new stores are being built, it requires more equipment, and that's what they make, so that's great. Manufacturers continue to look for diversification opportunities, and UST system upgrades are also significant for them. Biggest challenges for manufacturers, again, shortage of skilled labor. It's everywhere, and I will tell you this, we deal with a lot of other associations. Any association that we encounter and interact with, they too are talking about the shortage of skilled labor. So that's across the entire economy. Many of our manufacturers are struggling with outdated plant infrastructure and trying to decide how, when, and to what extent they can upgrade their infrastructure. I didn't see a lot about the cost of capital or the availability of capital. This seemed to be more making the decisions, when and how, and trying to guess in which direction markets are going to go. So that's been a challenge. Looking ahead, we ask how things are going this year, we ask about what's on the horizon. So how do you feel about next year? Distributors and contractors, the highest number that we have seen in the last 5 years, 7.66 on the 10 scale. Manufacturers, essentially in the same area as well, still over 7, which is very, very strong. And then we ask just a little bit farther out on the horizon, for the next 3 years, how do you feel? And 82.5% of our distributors and contractors said they were extremely or moderately optimistic. Manufacturers closely behind that at 77.8%. Not surprising, based on the fact that everyone is struggling with the shortage of labor. Most of you are saying, we hope to be able to hire more people next year. Hope is not a strategy, but that's the idea. Everybody needs more workers. And that shows up in this slide. Almost 68% of you expect to hire, if you're able, more people next year. And on the manufacturer side, essentially the same kind of a thing, 66%. So now let's move into threats and opportunities. This is where we are seeing some changes and some surprises to me. Threats and opportunities are really, to use a cliche, two sides of the same coin. If something is changing, it can threaten you, as Charlie talked about. If you embrace it, though, it can be an opportunity. Read a great quote recently from Thomas Edison, who said, most people miss opportunities because they usually come dressed in overalls and it looks like work. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You can see it as, man, this is too hard. The reality is it can be a great opportunity. And many of you, as you'll see in these statistics here, are seeing that. This is the first significant change that we saw from last year to this in terms of threats and opportunities. A lot of numbers and words on this slide, but essentially last year we asked, there had not been nationwide approval of E15 yet last year, but we asked, if that is to come, what impact do you think that will have in terms of the number of retailers offering the blend? This year we have nationwide approval for E15, so we can compare the two. Last year, go all the way down to small increase. So very few of you said dramatic increase, very few of you said moderate increase, but last year 37% of you said, I think there will be a small increase. This year 61.9% of you said, I think there's going to be a small increase. And the number of you who said, I don't think it's going to make any difference at all, also went down from 15% to 9%. And you're more certain of it. Last year, 33% of you said, I have no idea what is going to happen with E15. That number is down to 12%. So there is a shift in the number of our members who see that there is going to be a place for E15, which is going to be an opportunity for many of you in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. Here's what it looks by regions of the country. Now, these regions are based on PEI districts. If I had drawn the states a little bit differently, that area, District 7 there, that's sort of the orange color, if we had shifted that district just a little bit more right, we would have picked up Kansas and seen a little more activity in that state. But still, there's a couple of areas of the country that our members said, we think there actually is going to be a moderate increase in the number of retailers selling E15. Most of the country is in the small increase category, but some of you said more than that. I think that's partly regional based on the dynamics in the corn growing states, but it also has to do with which retailers are embracing the fuel and which retailers are in those markets. And so that could shift as well. If other retailers who are not currently on the E15 bandwagon decide to jump on, we could see this map change. So we'll ask this again next year. We'll want to see what happens there. In terms of EMV, this is another change. And this is, I think, as close to real life facts as you can get. Last year, we said, how many of your customers will have completed EMV upgrades by the October 2020 deadline? And you were more optimistic last year than you are this year. So last year you thought 64% of them will be done by then. This year that number has gone down to 59%. And here's why. We ask why that is so, and clearly procrastination continues to be the issue. This slide is fascinating to me because if you look at the various items there, you're not saying there's an equipment shortage. The equipment is available. You are saying, even though we are shorthanded, we could get this work done if people would just order it in time. We could make this happen, but you're not getting the orders in time. Still interesting that last year, 23% of your customers you think have no intention of upgrading, and that number is still about the same. 21% have either said to you or you have some reason to believe they are just not going to bother. It's a bigger number than I would have thought. Pretty interesting, though. This is a slide we've done for the last few years, Rate the Threat, and there's the only change here. We talked about technicians and customers doing, quote, our work. The only real change here is in the remote equipment monitoring category. That went up on a scale. This is on a scale of 1 to 10. The second highest ranked item now is remote equipment monitoring service by manufacturers that can bypass some of what you do. So that is something to watch, and I know there are some solutions and ideas out there for that, but that's something to watch that people worry about. How often do you encounter skimmers at retail fueling locations? Not a lot of change here. Skimmers are out there. The fact that essentially you are saying the same thing in terms of the frequency with which you encounter skimmers, I think just says the bad guys just keep getting smarter. And so you're still not seeing them. They're still there, but it's new technologies, and that continues to bedevil us as an industry. Now, this is the biggest change. This is the biggest slide of the whole presentation, I think. That's overstating it. It is the biggest differentiation we saw from last year to this year. To what extent are you involved in EV charging station installation and or service? Last year, 3.5% of you were already involved. This year, that number is almost 8%. So a doubling this year in the number of our distributors and contractors who are actively involved in EV charging. Not yet involved, but planning to, is even more impressive, from 15.8% last year to almost 32% this year. So a doubling in the number of our distributor and contractors who said, we are going to get into this market. That is a huge change. That is a huge shift, and that is a significant opportunity. So be watching for that. We will continue to watch that as well. Not a lot of change here. We ask about how people are going to pay for their fuel in the future, and there's really not a lot of change. You guys still think that credit or debit at the pump is going to continue to dominate, and the other options, contactless mobile, in-dash, and cash inside the store, are going to stay right where you thought they were last year. And then the last substantive slide, and I love this slide as well. We ask manufacturers, what percentage of your revenue is coming from international sales? And it's fun to look at this trend line. So you told us that 5 years ago, on average, that was 5.8% of your business. Last year it was 7.2%. Today it's 8.3%. That is a trend, and I don't think we can deny that. And that's really exciting as well, I think. So that's the survey part of the presentation. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about what's new at PEI. By the way, I should say all of that data that I presented, you can already download it through the app. It will be on our website as well, and this presentation is being filmed and will be available on our YouTube channel very quickly, almost instantaneously, I think, within the next day or two. What's new at PEI? Just wanted to put on my executive vice president hat and let you know some things that are out there that you may not have heard yet. 4 specific things that I'm going to mention about. Latin America. We continue to invest in this region, and there is real activity. If you've not met Liliana Cruz yet, is our director for Latin America. I don't even know if she's in the room, but well, there she is. There's Liliana Cruz right there by now. Everybody give Liliana a round of applause. And the reason I say give her a round of applause is Liliana made a presentation to our board on Tuesday, and she got 2 rounds of applause in that room as she went through the strategy of what she's doing. And we're already seeing activity. I haven't checked in the last 10 days, but 10 days or so ago, we had 138 Latin America attendees at this conference. Liliana had a lunch yesterday. 100 of them were in the room for that lunch. Really exciting, and she's got some great ideas, and we're excited about that. That's going to go places. New resources that are out there. We are announcing at this convention the release of the new edition of RP 1200. RP 1200, which is the practices for testing and verification of spill, overfill, leak detection, and secondary containment equipment. That document was not scheduled to be revised for another 2 or 3 years, but because of all the activity with sump testing, we felt like if somebody is going to say how that work ought to be done, it ought to be PEI. So that committee got together, has created some recommended practices for that, and there is a new edition of that document out. We're also happy to have released about a week or so ago, maybe even less than that, the Level 2 Service Technician Training Manual. We're very excited about that. The Level 1 manual was very successful. Many of you have used that. Now Level 2 is out. It's for the next step up for technicians who have a little bit of experience and want to go deeper. And RP 1600 on LNG fueling system, you'll be seeing a version of that for public comment before the end of the year, so that will be important. Charlie talked about getting involved in the association. Here are 3 great ways to get involved. 3 conferences coming up in the next few months. Young Executives will be February 5th through 7th. Kristen Wright does a great job with that program. Incredible program they had the other day here at the conference. We will have a purchasing and inventory conference coming up in April. PEI Women will also be late in April, another group that we're very excited about. And things to be watching for. These are things that are going to be so fun this year. We're continuing to try to communicate more effectively and more creatively with you. So you're going to see more webinars. We did a fantastic webinar a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, I should say. Scott Borst managed on distracted driving. That was a huge crowd. We're going to do more of those this year on technical and other subjects. We're going to start some podcasts, which we're excited about, interview experts on various things and get their take. We're going to be redesigning all of our e-newsletter, our substantive communications, including the Tulsa letter and news from PEI, to make them not just prettier, though that too, but also easier to read and maybe targeted a little more to what you care about. And we're also upgrading the PEI Journal app as people continue to go mobile. There are great ways even to make kind of long form articles in the journal easy to read, and so we're working on that. So we're excited about that. So that's the end of this presentation. Again, you can find all this information in other ways soon, but thanks for letting me come up. We appreciate it. And now I'll turn it over to Rick Young again. So.